Magical linguistics is the name of a model I have developed a few weeks ago that is based on sleight of mouth, but my goal with that model was to make it more simple, first of all, for newcomers who don't have 5 years of experience in NLP, and I wanted to make it more practical so that any conversation you have, you can stick it on the model and understand how you can respond and how you can react better in those situations. In this video, we are going to study the breakdown of a conversation I had recently with a client of mine in a therapeutic session, a kind of coaching session, and see how this was applied and how basically you can always bypass any level of resistance if you use that model properly. So my client here was a woman who had just met a guy that she was attracted to, and obviously he was attracted to her too, but she was unsure. She wasn't really sure she wanted to proceed with him and see him again. She had been for a pretty long time without any relationship for many different reasons, and she was unsure, and she was telling me, he has this great thing and that great thing, but something is off and I'm not sure I want to continue meeting him. And I asked, obviously, the first thing, okay, what specifically is it about him that is a concern for you, which might refer to as calling out for the specifics right here, but I would not even go into the model yet at this point, because we are not in reframing yet, we are just in elaborating what the problem is. She outlined, she said that the biggest problem she had with him was that he had a lot of trauma. Trauma about childhood, about many things. And she had processed a lot of her own trauma herself. She had processed a ton of shit about her family that we had worked together on, obviously, for the months before. And because of that higher level of development, somehow, she was seeing that he was way lower on the scale, from what she was saying, than her. Therefore, she was concerned about it. Should I really try any relationship with somebody like this, whereas I have evolved and he did not? So this is where we get into the reframing part, and that led into an answer she was not prepared for, that came from herself. I said, first of all, how is it a problem specifically that he did not heal all of his trauma yet? How is that a problem? Instead of reacting, yes, of course it is not. How is it a problem for you? Because there might be many reasons behind that, but I need to first know, what do you see in that? What do you see as a problem in this situation? And here I heard the first inference that I could work with during this session, which was, I have healed more than he did, the cause, therefore the effect. I would be using him for my own benefit if I had any kind of relationship, romantic, with him, because I would just use him, whereas I'm not providing anything that he can take because he's not as advanced as I am, something around those lines. The first thing I did kind of intuitively in that context was calling out to an alternative view, and in that case my view on relationships in general, not her specifically, but in general. I said, the word using is interesting because to me, everyone is using each other anyway in the beginning of a relationship, simply because we are all projecting what we want to see in a romantic partner. Part of that is the evolutionary reflex to make sure we bond together and we want to have kids. That is a basic mechanism. But the consequence of that, from my understanding, is that we all project and use each other anyway in the beginning of a relationship, which is why it always sounds and feels so great when you meet somebody new, and after 1 year it sounds like shit or like not as good as in the beginning, because that effect fades away. So I said, in that context, which is my perception, and you can disagree, by the way, I'm not saying I'm right, it's just my perception. If you are willing to accept my perception, then how is it a problem specifically that you are using him? How this word using can be bad in this context. And she replied with some of her backstory, some of her intention, explaining that she used to be a huge people pleaser in the past with her many other romantic relationships that she had, and all kinds of relationships, professional, personal, whatever. And she did not want to be a people pleaser anymore, but that was the only model of thinking she knew of in romantic relationships. Therefore, since she didn't want to be that anymore, she felt like she didn't have anything to bring to the table with that guy or with anybody else, actually, which comes back to self-esteem issues, but that is a more abstract concept, so I kept digging on this specifically. And she said as a consequence, so as a future outcome, what she's projecting from what will happen if she does engage with him in the relationship, I would just be taking advantage of his lower level of development compared to mine. Because if I don't give anything like I used to, then I would just be manipulating that guy. I should not do this. And I had the idea, which I was not sure of, but I tested and it worked, at least here. I had the idea of using the old meta model challenge, which is how can this mean that? To challenge complex equivalencies or cause and effects, maybe both at the same time. You say, or I said right here, how can his lower level of development equals only mean that you are taking advantage of him. The presupposition behind that language pattern, to directly challenge the inference made by the person, the presupposition behind that pattern is that there is not only one way this will end. When somebody says, because this happened, I'm fucked. Fine, that's one thing that may be true. However, I don't accept the presupposition that this is the only outcome. I come from the presupposition there could be many different outcomes from that thing that happened. You have been manipulated, you have been traumatized, whatever happened in your life. Okay, fine, so far you have felt fucked up because of it. That is one inference your mind has made to make sense of what happened to you. The way we can challenge that, and the way I have certainly challenged that in this conversation, is by detaching somehow, breaking the link between that cause and that effect. Just because X happened does not mean Y should always be true, should always be here. So how is it possible that his lower development only mean that you are taking advantage of him? How is it impossible that it cannot lead to anything else? The result of all of that is just saying maybe you could act, maybe your behavior with him could produce something else than manipulation or taking advantage of somebody. Maybe you could produce some more positive outcomes with him. How do you know it is impossible, basically? And she replied with something that to me sounded more like an analogy, because she said, well, the worst example I have is when a colleague at my work, at my last job, tried to use me for all the dirty work and then made me feel lower by criticizing everything I did. That was terrible and I don't wish that to happen to anyone else. So she basically told me she had been projecting unconsciously something that happened to her on what might happen with another person who is not her. She projected something bad that happened to her onto the situation of somebody else. And when I explained this out loud, that her only justification for why this will happen, the negative outcome, I will be manipulating him, her only justification for why this will happen is only coming from one subjective experience from her own life, not his. So I said, are you sure it makes sense that you project, that you take that single event as a proof that it is going to end up badly with this guy? And there was not really any more reframing, because she got confused. She got really confused and she processed for a few seconds difficult to answer, like, oh yeah, okay. And at some point she said, I guess I just need to try, because I haven't really tried yet and I need to try before I can figure out if yes or not, and maybe it will be a no, but if yes or not, I want to engage into anything with him. But so far she realized that she hadn't really tried anything yet. So that little reframing session helped her to engage on at least something that was scary to her based on her past experiences, but the point is to get people back into action, into movement. And from that movement, they can figure out by themselves what are the right decisions, what are the wrong decisions. But if they never experiment with new things, they will just keep stagnating in their life forever. So that was one simple example of how I used that model recently, and I love playing with those mind tricks, language tricks whenever I can. As you may know, I am writing right now a book about this model and all the patterns together and how to use them. And I just had the idea at the end of the book to give you exercises for, okay, this is how the conversation went so far. Examples like the ones in this video, and based on that, how would you answer? And then later in the book, I would tell you what I would have answered, explaining that just because your reply doesn't match mine doesn't mean yours is wrong either. It is simply a different way of interacting. But I would think it is a better way of teaching those skills and those kind of techniques than just giving you the theory and then, okay, go apply it. That many people just don't get along with that. So I am developing right now those alternative ways of teaching people those skills. And in the meantime, before the book is ready, you can already download the 7 steps to master sleight of mouth down below in the description, which is kind of an introduction to all of those things. How do you take a statement, a belief, and reframe it in a non-confrontational way to prevent any sort of resistance? How can you help the people reframe their limiting beliefs in helpful ways so that they get better in their life? With that being said, thank you for listening. Keep working on your skills. I will be watching you and you will be watching me again soon. Thank you. Goodbye.